I herald his beginning. I herald your end. I herald Galacticus. I'm sure you know where I'm going. I am Sarah, and I am here to tell you the tale of how a family stood together against a world-devouring god. Yes, I am here once again to give you the full breakdown and ending explained, and today we're travelling through the multiverse to check out Fantastic Four: First Steps. But before we begin, please give us a like, share and subscribe to the channel. Now strap in and get ready, as we are in for quite a ride. The film begins with an introduction to this alternate universe, which is numbered 828, a reference to Jack Kirby's birthday, which is August the 28th. In fact, there's a ton of references to Jack Kirby and Stan Lee throughout the film, with a direct reference to Timely Comics, the name it was known as before it became Marvel, which I'll be pointing out, as well as tons of other Easter eggs and whatnot. We get a glimpse of the Baxter Building, the infamous headquarters of the Fantastic Four, and it's late at night. And Reed needs some iodine to treat a scratch. Sue, on the other hand, is sitting on the john and she's looking a bit anxious. As the two talk to one another, Reed prattling on about how he can never really find anything and other typical married life stuff, Sue approaches him and slides a pregnancy test onto the bathroom counter. It's positive. At first, Reed is shocked. They've been trying for 2 years to no avail, but then as he gazes into his wife's eyes, he calms a bit. The idea of having a kid dawning on him slowly, but in typical Reed's fashion, he immediately begins to wonder, will the child have superpowers or will he be born abnormal? To be fair, I would be wondering the exact same thing. The film then transitions over to the Ted Gilbert Show, and we get a kind of historical montage of everything from the origins of the Fantastic Four to their greatest feats and what they're currently doing. Picture it kind of like the Ed Sullivan Show when they first showed the world the Beatles. In this montage, we learn how Reed, his wife Sue, her brother Johnny, and Reed's best friend, the fellow astronaut Ben, began the universe's first foray into space, where they were hit by some kind of cosmic storm, resulting in them all receiving strange new powers and abilities. The rocket resembles one from old space cartoons, a long, slender ship with 3 rockets attached to the outside. With their new powers, they decide to use them for good, becoming protectors of the Earth, starting with small criminal empires and saving lives from tragic accidents, to eventually taking down foes like Giganto, the Mad Thinker, Red Ghost and Mole Man. Here we get our first Easter egg reference to the classic cartoon series, the Fantastic Four, which in-universe is based on the many real adventures and spawns a catchphrase for the thing, it's clobbering time. After showing us their grand victories, the montage then cuts to them establishing the Future Foundation, where Reed hosts a kind of Bill Nye Kids show to teach science. He even demonstrates an equation that proves that the multiverse exists, as well as other dimensions, dropping a big hint for the upcoming Doomsday and Secret War films. Sue Storm joins the United Nations and even manages to broker a peace between the above-ground Denzians of Earth and the underground nation of Subterranea, led by the reformed Harvey Mole Man Elder. Curiously though, the big United Nations summit, Latveria's chair is empty. This could mean a few different things. Either the current leader is still the previous dictator, which Victor Von Doom has yet to defeat, or it could be Dr. Doom and he's possibly had a run-in with the Fantastic Four. It could even mean that he might just be off-world, and I don't just mean somewhere in space, but maybe somewhere else in the multiverse entirely. But we'll come back to that later. The montage ends with voices from around the world thanking the Fantastic Four for 4 great years. We then switch back over to the Baxter Building. Night has fallen and Ben and Johnny are setting the dinner table, while Herbie the robot attempts to make a good pasta sauce. Johnny, with his high metabolism due to the nature of his powers, can't wait for Sue and Reed to join and begins munching away on some Lucky Charms. When the married couple enter the room, Johnny remarks that they're late and Sue becomes a little bit frazzled. Ben picks up on this immediately, even though she tries to play it cool. However, he's never been the shy one, so Ben just flat out asks, "Are you pregnant?" Sue, having the worst poker face on the planet, breaks into a smile and nods, and everyone goes for a group hug. Reed, however, looks absolutely terrified. More so when Johnny rubs it in that he's totally unequipped for what's to come. The news gets wind of this, of course, and the world greatly anticipates the 5th member of the dynamic family of heroes. They even make a joke that it could be twins, a reference to one of the other Richard's offsprings, Valeria. Here we get our second montage to speed things along a little bit, as Reed instructs Herbie to baby-proof the whole building, and also begins working on a type of scanning device so that he can study the DNA of the child and whatnot, to see if it will be born healthy or with or without any abilities. Several tests later, and it looks like the child will just be a normal baby. This doesn't put Reed at ease though, until Sue uses her powers to make her stomach skin invisible, to show Reed the baby in full. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and even a few strands of thin hair. But everything looks normal. Reed also receives a deep space transmission, which in keeping with the 60s sci-fi aesthetic, it gets recorded onto a gold-plated vinyl record, and he passes this on to Johnny, who wishes to try and decode the language. What's kind of crazy is how unsurprised they are that there's intelligent life out there in the universe, as if they've met some aliens before perhaps. Anyway, Johnny is upset with Reed because he's been putting off a second spacebound mission for the past 4 years. And that's mainly due to Reed feeling responsible for them almost dying and getting powers in the first place. Namely his best friend Ben, who's been turned into a giant rock man. So instead he fills his time with a manner of other projects to keep him and the rest of the family busy, which includes a device that allows for instant teleportation, something that'll come up again later in the film, and possibly in Doomsday. The thing is though, moving an object isn't all that difficult, but moving organic matter, such as a living person, still requires way too much power, which he demonstrates by teleporting a chicken egg across the room, and New York City kind of loses power for a moment when they do this. One of the things I really liked is that this film is that while Johnny Storm is still a cocky jock who often thinks with his other brain, he isn't exactly dumb either. Using the recorded transmission, he begins his studies on the alien language and begins to put together the tone and context from the message. How on one recording it seems almost happy and thankful, and while others sound desperate, like a cry for help. It's if only he had had an Uhura to help guide him through Xenon linguistics. We then cut to Ben Grimm travelling down memory lane. As he visits an old neighbourhood in Yancey Street, he stops at his favourite bakery, picking up some black and white cookies, and shows off his impressive strength to a bunch of local kids. One of the teachers, Rachel, comes out to talk to him, and they flirt a little. But Ben still feels like he's a monster, and so he quickly discourages himself from pursuing it any further. It's dinner time, once again at the Richards household, and Herbie seems to be frantically carving a pumpkin, indicating that Halloween must be right around the corner. However, before they can sit down and enjoy their meal, the night sky lights up in a blaze, with falling debris raining down over New York. Johnny Flames, on the other hand, flies up to see what's what and comes face to face with the Silver Surfer, who takes off towards Times Square. The rest of the team jump into the fantastic car and arrive just in time for Shalabow to begin her announcement. She proclaims that their world is doomed and that they should use the next few days to say goodbye to everyone and everything. She heralds Galacticus, the devourer of worlds, and Earth has been marked for consumption. However, as she delivers this news, she almost looks apologetic, as if she could bring them happier news, she would. She then takes back off to space, and Johnny chases after her, managing to catch up and grab her surfboard. But she leans in close and says something to him in an alien language, staring deep into his eyes, before shaking him off and warping out into the dark nothingness. Back at headquarters, Reed and the rest of the team attempt to track her, but she's moving at such an incredible speed they can't follow her. However, since he's so smart, Reed is able to track where she's been, figuring out a pattern of worlds that have recently been completely destroyed, giving them some kind of triangulation of where this Galacticus could be. But this also means that she wasn't lying, and that the Galacticus can do exactly what she says he can do. They've got about 20 hours before he arrives, so they need to get the rocket up and running again and head into space to confront the Devourer, and maybe negotiate some kind of peace. Johnny interjects that she spoke to him and he heard those words before on those recordings, but the family thinks he was just caught up in her beautiful naked space babeness. You know, Johnny being Johnny, except for Sue, who gives him the benefit of the doubt and encourages him to work the connection out and find something more that could possibly help them. Reed gives the team their new spacesuits, all designed to let them use their abilities, which with Johnny's suit comes with a caveat, that because fire burns oxygen, even with the reserve tank, if he burns too long he will suffocate, so he needs to try and take it easy. Reed addresses the world, telling them that the Fantastic Four will go out and meet this being, and find a way to find peace and protect everyone. This is one thing on his mind, however, still hankering back to the initial space exploration attempt, and he's worried that Sue being pregnant, what if they get hit by some cosmic waves again, or something worse? What will happen to the child? Well, not much he can do about it now. They're on the clock, and time is running out. And so, the next day, they prepare the ship and successfully launch into space. Using some kind of slip space engine dock thing, they fly their spaceship into the area and are able to generate a kind of wormhole, allowing for faster than light travel, to head out into deep space and face their new nemesis, Galactus. When they arrive at their destination, it's just in time to see a planet being devoured by the gigantic world-eating engine thing that bursts through it and inhaling every bit of the planet like a giant vacuum cleaner. Reed instructs Sue to make the ship invisible, and they try to veer off so that they can study it, but it's too late. A tractor beam locks onto him, and no matter how much they try to maneuver away from it, they are pulled into this massive ship. It kind of reminds me of the Romulan mining vessel from the 2009 Star Trek film, except less spiky and more like the mouth of a sandworm from Dune. Once they land inside, however, they are greeted by Shalabal, who informs them that Galacticus is expecting them. Here goes nothing, I guess? While on their way to meet this mysterious new being, Johnny tries to talk to the Silver Surfer, asking her what the words meant that she spoke to him on the day she first visited Earth. She tells him, "It's a blessing, it means die with yours." In this moment, her cold and calculating expression melts into a rather sympathetic one, and her eyes then trail off to look past Johnny, as if remembering all the countless worlds, the immeasurable lives lost due to her choosing to feed Galacticus never-ending hunger. Then we come to the moment everyone has been waiting for, the throne of Galactus, and he is massive. Normally I'd use an analogy of something like comparing an ant to a human, but even this doesn't fully explain just how truly massive he really is. And I give Marvel full credit here for going all in on making him as comic book accurate as possible, complete with the purple helmet and glowing eyes. And a voice that booms with such bass, the entire theatre I was in shook like there was an earthquake. After Shalabal gives the team a proper introduction, Galactus gives a little historical background for himself, explaining that he was once a man himself from a universe that existed long ago. For those of you unfamiliar with the character, the more in-depth story is that he was once a scientist named Galen, and just like many modern day scientists theorise, in our reality the universe began with a big bang, which eventually will collapse in on itself and repeat this cycle for eternity essentially. Galen wished to find a way to stop this happening, a way to save his universe and become imbued with a fraction of the cosmic power due to the involvement of some cosmic entities, namely the sixth iteration of eternity, also known as the sentience of the universe. This didn't save his people or so, but it did allow him to survive the Big Crunch, and he was transformed over the course of millions of years. Once the 7th iteration formed, when he emerged, he had the unrelenting hunger to devour energy, and learned that because of what he had become, he was responsible for keeping balance in the universe, which ultimately stops, or at least slows down, the universe's collapse. Crazy stuff. The Fantastic Four try to ask him to spare their world, and Galactus makes them an offer, or rather a request, something from them: Sue's unborn child. According to Galactus, the baby possesses a pure form of power cosmic, even greater than his own, and thus could take his place, freeing him from this internal nightmare. Well, I mean, of course, Sue and Reed and the rest say no. It's one thing to sacrifice yourself to save a life, let alone the world, but choosing to sacrifice the life of someone else, not to mention your own flesh and blood, it can be hard. This angers Galactus, and when the team tries to flee, he sends a surfer after them, while he disconnects himself from the ship so that he can come after them as well. However, with all the excitement of the chase, Sue begins to have contractions. The baby is now coming. And it's coming right now. Johnny and Ben try to slow down Shalabal, and they manage to get on board the ship and take off, as Sue pretty much goes into labour. They rearrange their engines going into warp drive, but it's still not fast enough, and Shalabal catches up to them easily, and she's coming for the kid. Johnny mans the cannons, and like Luke aboard the Falcon, uses the Force to hit her with a blast or two. This only temporarily stops her as she bounces back and is even more determined than ever to get that child. Reed has an idea though. Drop out of the wormhole near a collapsing star and fly in close enough so that the surfer gets sucked in and gets sucked into a time dilation where they will make their escape. It's risky, but there's no time for another plan, so Ben grabs the controls and puts his piloting skills to the test. He flies the ship straight at the collapsing star, and then Sue uses her body to make just the main ship invisible, so they can detach themselves from the exterior engines. The surfer continues to chase after those engines, and when she realises that she's actually being tricked, it's too late, and she gets pulled in, pretty much freezing her in place. The Fantastic Four then use the gravity of the black hole to slingshot them back to Earth, and away they go. When they arrive on Earth, they are greeted by the roar of a massive crowd, eagerly awaiting tales of their adventure. One by one, they step off the ship, and Sue finally emerges at the end holding a baby. Franklin Richards has finally arrived in the MCU. Now, when I tell you I'm excited to see what this all leads to, I'd be underplaying it, as Franklin is one of, if not the most powerful mutant in all of Marvel. He is an extremely reality warper, so powerful that in the cosmics, he even creates full universes in the palm of his hands. But we'll talk about his powers much later, don't worry. At the press conference, everyone who's gathered looks on with anticipation for good news, and unfortunately Reed must deliver them the truth. He explains that they didn't defeat Galactus, and he's still coming, and that he asked for something that they were just not willing to sacrifice: their son Franklin. This is where the film takes a bit of a complex dark turn, and I'm glad they did it. See, statistically speaking, it's kind of like the trolley car problem. Sacrifice one life to save billions, but on a moral scale, everyone always looks for a third option. How do you save billions without sacrificing any lives? And as much as the Fantastic Four have been defied and become heroes to this world, the people are torn between this choice, as fear takes over and many of them want to live and can't understand why they wouldn't just give up the child to save everyone else. Reed promises them that they will find a way, but again the world is split. Cults form to worship Galactus in hopes that they will be spared. Wars start over old grudges, and mobs upon mobs of people surround the Baxter building, calling for Franklin to be handed over to their destroyer. With time running out, will they come up with a plan to take down this monstrous mad tyrant? Reed toils with the idea of handing over Franklin, something which disturbs Sue to no end, that he would even entertain that idea in the first place. He mentions Archimedes' lever, quoting, "Give me a lever and I will move heaven and earth," and the team gets to work on finding a solution. Johnny, using the translation of the phrase "the surfer said to him," builds an algorithm to translate all of the other messages from space in order to possibly find clues on how to defeat Galactus or maybe call for help. Reed, however, takes the quote literally and lines out a plan that could work. What if they just moved the Earth so that they could build those transport pylons all over the planet in strategic locations? Using his transporter technology, they could literally relocate the Earth to another habitable star system, and one where Galactus wouldn't be able to find them. The trick is, how do we get the entire world together on this and get it all built in less than a few days? Well, this is where Sue comes in, and her standing with the world's community in large. She takes Franklin out to meet them, introducing him to the world, and talks about what it means to be a family. She mentions that ever since they got their powers, the entire population of the planet has become their family, and if they work together, they have a real shot at surviving. The crowd cheers, and not too long after, they unify to get the work pronto. We get a montage of several countries building these pylons, while Reed works out the necessary equations. We even get a scene of Ben having grown a rock beard, which is in homage to issue number 605. And finally, the day of transportation arrives. Power grids all over the world have been connected. All systems are gone, Reed flips the lever, and the machine whirls to life. A gigantic magnetic field begins to spread over the globe, but then suddenly, alarms begin blaring. One pylon goes down, then another, and another, rapidly going offline all across the eastern side of the world. What's going on? Enter Shalabal, flying from one location to another and absolutely destroying the work that they did. She manages to pretty much destroy every single one except for the final pylon at the centre of Times Square, where she's knocked out the sky by Johnny just in the nick of time. He then displays some brilliance by commandeering all the big television screens across the city and plays a newly translated message for her in her own language. Perplexed, Shalabal flies down to him and asks him how he got these, how he knows her name and her native tongue. And he replies that he knows much more than that. He knows that she sacrificed herself to Galactus, becoming his herald in order to spare her world. And that while the message from her homeworld were praising her in thanks, there were so many more messages damning her for choosing them to die instead. As the voices flood in, she becomes increasingly more and more emotional until she cannot handle it anymore and takes off into space. Before she leaves though, she gives Johnny advice, cryptically telling him to give up the child because if he was older, he would do it himself. But what do they do now? Galactus is pretty much on their doorstep and they only have one pylon left. Well, Reed suggests that they use the transporter to send Galactus across the universe, instead of the whole planet. Okay, that's a good plan, but how do they get Galactus to walk into the transporter beam? Franklin, Sue says. Reed scrambles to find any words, saying that he will find another way, but Sue knows Franklin is the only bait that they could use to get the demigod to leave his ship. And on top of that, even if they're able to get Galactus to the bridge, once they open it, they'll have only 37 seconds to push him through. Reed constructs a baby carrier made out of some kind of super indestructible material, taking every precaution that Franklin will be safe. The other big obstacle they need to solve is Galactus is huge, right? And no matter what direction he comes from, he will tear through the city. So they basically need to evacuate like a couple 100 million people. Enter Mole Man. Using her charm and friendship with the leader Mole Man, she convinces him to allow the citizens of New York City to enter his territory and seek temporary residence. Ben also goes to visit Rachel, telling her to be safe and that they're going to go and grab some baked goods when it's all over, sprinkling the first seeds of love. With all that taken care of, all that's left now is waiting for the arrival of the Great Devourer. Galactus floats down in his gigantic comic-accurate chair, landing off the coast of New York, causing a wave to splash over and flow through several neighbourhood blocks. As he climbs out of the war himself, and he grabs a large handful of Earth and takes in a deep breath of it. Looking awfully hungry though, using his cosmic awareness, he scans the city for Franklin's signature, and spots him in Times Square, and begins his short walk there. Well, it's a short walk for him, anyway. Buildings topple and cars are crushed as he stomps his way through the city, and below them, deep underground, in the land of Subterranea, the walls shake and the debris falls from the ceiling. Just as Galactus arrives at the centre, Johnny flies out and blasts him in the eye, causing him to close them long enough for Reed to swing down and swap the carriage containing Franklin with an identical empty one. But this doesn't fool Galactus, as right before he steps into the portal range, his awareness kicks in and he knows Franklin has been moved. "Clever little bugs," he exclaims. Sue chases after him in the fantastic car. Ben tries hurtling trucks at him and Johnny sets him on fire, and Reed uses his stretching power to try and fling himself towards the tower to get Franklin before Galactus can. Ben is hurled into space and Johnny goes after him while Galactus slaps down the car, causing it to crash into a building, and this knocks Sue out for a brief moment. This pisses off Reed, who grabs a building antenna and launches himself onto Galactus, stabbing him repeatedly. Galactus reaches around and grabs Reed and begins to pull him apart like some Laffy Taffy, or a wad of chewing gum. It looks incredibly painful. Johnny flies in with Ben and he screams out his catchphrase, "It's clobbering time," as Johnny releases him and Ben smashes into Galactus like a cannonball. None of this slows him down though. Galactus reaches a tower and reaches inside, grabbing up Franklin in the palm of his giant hand. More determined than she's ever been, filled with motherly rage and protective instincts, Sue goes full power on Galactus, and using her force field powers begins pushing him back towards the portal. Reed asks her to stop, it's too much power, but she yells at him to save their son, and so Reed swings into action while Johnny flies off to start up the portal, and Ben puts a bunch of obstacles behind the giant foe to cause him to trip up off his feet, making it easier for Sue to continually push him. The score is epic, almost angelic, and Sue gives it her all. Reed manages to rescue Franklin just in time, and Galactus begins to fall into the portal. 10 seconds left before the portal closes, but oh no, Galactus begins climbing back through. Johnny powers up full blaze, tells Franklin Uncle Johnny loves him, and flies full speed at the Mad Devourer. But wait, in swoops the Silver Surfer Shalabal, who knocks him out the way, and she instead collides with Galactus' chest, hitting him with her cosmic strength, knocking him through the portal just as it closes. What a spectacle. In a heartbreaking moment, Sue lies there motionless, and Reed runs over, beginning to do CPR. Since Reed is played by Pedro Pascal, this gave me the same vibes of when he was trying to save Sarah in The Last of Us. No matter what he tries though, Sue doesn't respond. There's no breath and no heartbeat. Sue Storm is dead. Franklin begins howling, screaming, crying harder than a baby on a 14-hour flight. He reaches for his mom, desperately grasping at her uniform, when suddenly his scream turns to sniffles and his eyes widen. He looks at her and grows quiet. Ben and Johnny and Reed try to console each other, but then they become aware of Franklin. As Reed reaches to pick him up, Franklin smiles for just a moment, and Sue's hand twitches. Her eyes then suddenly light up with the same cosmic energy that Galactus displayed when he used his cosmic awareness. Sue gasps for air, her body convulses, and then she sits up. coughing hard, tears streaming down her face, and everyone is just shocked. Little baby Franklin just coos and grabs his mother tight. Sue looks over to Reed and just whispers, "He's not our son. He's so much more." So what just happened? Well, let me explain a little bit further. Remember how I stated before that Franklin is an all-powerful reality warper? Well, okay, so Sue actually did die and Franklin didn't really bring her back to life. Not the way characters are usually brought back to life in the MCU. Instead, he just made her not dead. He physically changed reality. For example, he could have just made her have red hair and 2 feet taller if he wished, and it would have just happened, as reality to him is as malleable as Play-Doh, or as a drawing or so. Not to confuse this with magic, as the rules for magic in the MCU are different. So for example, Wanda, who wields chaos magic, has some reality warping abilities, but they draw on the energies of the chaos dimension, and therefore she can create things but not so much unmake or change things from one state to another, unless you count House of M, of course. A definite difference for sure, but in a power scaling situation, Wanda would be level 100, while Franklin would be level 1 trillion. The citizens of New York service from below and celebrate the victories of the Fantastic Four. We then cut to the Ted Gilbert show once again, where the team is about to go on television and regale the world of their triumphant tale, when they get an alert on their special watches, and so they must hop into action once again. No time off when you're a superhero after all, and the credits roll. And as it's standard with MCU films, we get a mid-credits scene. It's 4 years later and Franklin is growing up, and quite the smart little guy, already reading Dickens at his age. It's bedtime, which means story time, and he requests his favourite book. So Sue gets up to go and get it, and we hear a sound, almost like the sound of those TVA doors makes. When Sue returns to the room, we see Franklin talking to someone. She walks around to get a better look. And who is it? It's Dr. Doom himself. He's taken his mask off, holding it in one hand, but we don't get to see his face. Franklin is reaching out and touching his face though. This is important because of 2 reasons. One being that Dr. Doom never takes his mask off to hide his scars and whatnot. But secondly, in the comics, Franklin does heal his wounds. Very cool callback to the comics. Some more credits roll along, and the final post-credit scene is literally just the intro to the old cartoon series, where we see the Fantastic Four beating up a bunch of villains and saving the day with science. The end. What a ride! I had such a blast watching this film. It was serious but not too serious. It had well developed characters and Galactus was appropriately intimidating and his on-screen presence was absolutely imposing. I am super psyched for the next MCU films to see where this all goes and cannot wait for Franklin to display even more of his abilities. Definitely the best superhero film I've seen this year, hands down. But what did you think? What film is your favourite in the multi-rebooted franchise? Let us know in the comments below. I want to thank you all for checking out this video. Please leave a like, share and subscribe to the channel and make sure to hit that bell icon to stay up to date with all our latest releases, as well as we deliver reviews and breakdowns each week, as well as other film related content. I have been your host Sarah and I appreciate you being here with me today. Have a beautiful day and take care. Goodbye.